the animals in the forest. If they could talk, what would they say? They might say, be careful with fire in the forest. Just like Smokey says, only you can prevent forest fires.
Because my grandfather wrote and published poetry all the time, my mother's father. And he did mostly political stuff, but he published constantly. And, you know, Grandpa wrote poetry, so I was going to write poetry. And so I don't remember a time when I didn't do it. I can remember a time when it didn't sound so well when I read it, but but I've been seriously doing it since I was just a kid. The first one that the university published, Lights Along the Missouri, the theme for that was coming home, poets who've come back to Nebraska. And the other poets in that anthology are Richard Wyatt and Patrick Gray. And the idea was poets who lived here, moved away, and have come back. So I chose poems for that collection that in different ways discussed my Nebraska experience. So Lights Along the Missouri. Each poem is a special light, you know, along the river with the water theme again. Second one, Storm Warning. I chose the title from one of the poems in the collection, but I had nothing to do with that chapbook. The editor took about 50, 60 poems, selected the number of poems that would be in the chapbook, and then asked me which of the poems I'd like to use as a title. And I chose Storm Warning, because a good friend of mine's last name is Storm, and I could do a hidden little dedication that way. And with Ending the Fast, which is a collection that deals with Native American themes, I spent a lot of time as a kid with living with and playing with and having friends who were Native Americans, and ended up, when I was teaching at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, officing with a Native American poet, Gail Tremblay, and she had invited me to a potlatch, which is a thing Indians do when they end the fast. They have a certain ceremony they go through, her Indians, Micmac, and when they end the fast, then they give all their belongings away. Of course, you're supposed to give them back the next day or something nicer. So I decided that collection would be the title poem for that collection, Ending the Fast. Well, I write a lot about getting old lately, as opposed to when I was younger, when I wrote a lot about not being old. I don't know. I think I don't really have a lot of themes. When I was trying to select the poems for this evening, I thought, well, I have a collection called, that I'm trying to get published, called At the Edge of the Ancient Inland Sea, because Nebraska is at the edge of the ancient inland sea. And I thought I would do all Nebraska poems. But I kept finding other things I wanted to throw into the pot. And to be honest with you, we're just going to, water. I write a lot about water. You'll see that this evening. We'll begin with At the Edge of the Ancient Inland Sea, and we'll end with Spring Rain. So I suppose water is a constant symbol and metaphor. This little book I like to talk about because this is I don't consider this a mantle, but it's been handed down to me from Madeline DeFries, who was given this thing to her readings by Richard Hugo, who had been given this thing to give his first reading at the University of Washington by Theodore Redke. So this thing goes back, and if it lasts, I'm going to give it to Stephen Blasky over at the University of Iowa sometime between now and the time they nail my box shut. So I'm going to begin with, originally I thought that I would read all Nebraska poems, and as I began to sift through, I have a collection called At the Edge of the Ancient Inland Sea. That's all Nebraska stuff from my Nebraska experience, and as I began to sift through that, I thought, well, no, I'd kind of like to add this poem, kind of like to add that poem. So they won't be all Nebraska poems, but they'll all be sort of related in some way to certain things. I'm going to read you the title poem from that collection, At the Edge of the Ancient Inland Sea. As you know, Nebraska is at the edge of the ancient inland sea. This poem is dedicated to Sissy Newton, a friend and poet of mine who lives in Omaha. Long before they named the place Nebraska, before the Ogallala and the Sioux came to hunt and draw their sacred circles, beds of kelp, thick as sorghum, clung here deep in watery secrets. Strange ancient fish swam through the enormity of time. Trilobites and ostrocoderms ripened like lobsters and enormous trout. Here Brontosaurus and Triceratops munched their way to oblivion, and strange winged reptiles prepared the sky for eagles and the fat quail nesting out near our corn. Sometimes when the wind's just right, I can hear the ancient waves rushing against the shore and see in the shadows behind the fields the aged menagerie parading through the shelter belts like enormous dreams roaming through the slight divisions of time. We move right away, clear across the country out to the Pacific Ocean. There's an island out there called Lopez Island that I visit as frequently as I can, almost every year. And friends of mine who live in Omaha have family who live on Lopez Island. And Diane Gillespie, who teaches in the Goodrich program at UNO, she and I pick blackberries there, and we make blackberry jam. So this is called Blackberry Picking on Lopez Island with Dr. Diane Gillespie, and its Nebraska connection, I think, will be obvious. We have come from the plains of Nebraska to breathe salt air, walk with our toes exposed to what sand knows each time the wild and willing Pacific Sea licks its way among them. We come to feast on smoked salmon, remind ourselves that in our dust-filled Great Plain hearts we harbor fictions that let us live here year-round. And so we do what natives do. We dig clams, drink cheap wine, celebrate our way to every sun setting in the sea, and we pick blackberries, those small dark glands of summer blooming like ebony globlets along the thistle stems, spiny-leaved briar patches that thrive everywhere delicious. We don't look much like intellectuals, stretching and stooping to pluck the choicest morsels from their stems. Nothing we do hints at the rash of words we have exercised or the strange work we do to get here. We could be simians gorging our way to a long sleep in the sun, cave dwellers picking our way to the waterhole, glancing over our backs to see what beasts might be downwind and foraging. We are old ladies picking for a hot steaming pie, jelly and jam stealers with purple-stained fingers and chins, creatures from the Platte, gorging our way from peace to nirvana. The next one I want to read for you is called Map of Nebraska. Sometime in the 50s, I saw this map, and I drew a sketch of it and a list of the stuff that was on it. It was in a big book at someone's home, because I knew I would want to put it in a poem sometime. And what the poem really does is just sort of catalog what was on this wonderful map. Map of Nebraska, circa 1856. In the frayed right-hand corner, the wind, cheeks full and puffing, blows at the back side of covered wagons headed west from the banks of the Moe. Just below the wind's chin, wheat fields, far as the wind can see, bloom where once the Sioux and Omaha gathered wild plums. In the corner below the wind, someone has sketched a herd of buffalo grazing along the Nebraska side of the river. Below the buffalo, printed by a fine hand, the words, "A Modern Guide for Travelers," prepared by the request of Peter Sarpy, printed by the New York Book and Print Company, $1. To the left of the wind and wheat and buffalo, out near the land's edge, happy settlers walk arm in arm with natives, deer dance. Small sod houses wait beneath huge elms. The words peace and plenty are etched on a scroll of birth held by two small children. One wears feathers and a loincloth, the other knee shorts, shirt and tie. They have their arms around each other and stand just outside a small white church. The next piece is an old piece of mine. It's dedicated to Linda Pratt, who is, those of you who are associated with the university here know her in the English department. I'm fortunate enough to have her as a neighbor in Omaha. This is called Moving from Puget Sound to Nebraska. Bored with what I fear to the wind's skill to take circle and form, the flat screams the prairie offers up when night darkens to a point, I return to Nebraska, where the fields still bloom wet as sponges, where whiffs of goldenrod and mustard still tickle down the Platte and Ogallala as though it were the thing to do. It is only here the sun lifts its single eye to the sower's spell, to the distant splats of green growing like warts along the rivers, to the well-planned shelters belting off the wind in songs enough to wake a sparrow's sleep. Such a wind might woo away the dead. It can hold you like a portrait, or push until the house is full of nerves, windows knuckled down, a cold snow whistling to a heap. Perhaps it was a single storm that called me. These plains are Grail and Quest, born of the lightning's sting, where plainsmen kneel to the sky as surely as the hooves of great beasts still thunder in the dreams of the toothless Ogallala, sleeping it off down on Jackson. Here the mighty gods of wheat and corn are piled like sticks, bartered against the mother of ice, the 7 saccharine songs of autumn sweetening the air with what always promises to drift along the river. It's a place to rub the sun until the white light of glaucoma lingers on the lids, a place where a stone is just a stone until you throw it, the wind only wind, until it swoops down between the heat of the prairie and the clear chill slipping down the Dakota moon. It is just then, when the air slams shut and the clouds hold their breath until they're a thin green, that I can squint out along the land and see Puget sailboats bobbing, tilting their great cheeks leeward. It is then I see great whales lifting like mighty anthems from the sea, wearing the wet skins of the land's last amen. Out near Brunswick, there's a little town called Royal, and a little ways from Royal, there's a small lake called Grove Lake. You know the lake? So this is called Camping Near Grove Lake for Ronnie, Carol, Tina, and Tim. Dare anyone doubt the trees when the sun's last licks slip away in silence? We go among them unafraid. Out near the thistle blooms and cattails, bullfrogs full of wet and wonder tell us their low-throated wisdom. We climb Royal Hill, watch the small towns blink out for the night. Our minds go vacant as windows. We watch the one-eyed moon wade belly deep across the pond. 2 nightfowl tow silver wakes near the shore. The lake slows to a slice of unpulsed time. We prowl the darkness, our hearts all thumbs. This next one is the Nebraska Quartet. It's dedicated to Jim Kelly, who was a very good friend of mine, who worked with the Office of Planning in Omaha for many, many years until he died of leukemia. It's a poem that simply deals with our 4 seasons. The quartets are the seasons. Spring. Once more, the green creeps out on the branches. Everything with urges goes to the stems. Nebraska grows wild and feathery, a thing young in the eyes, crazed by fire, dizzy with shoots of peony and grasses, the magic of green magic everywhere delicious, and in the leaf, music. Summer. 3 o'clock hangs limp on the lawn. The leaves, wide-eyed, full of wonder, stare at the sun until at last they stare the damn thing down. A few have already given the wind its way with them and swarm like butterflies, single-winged and full of worries. I go among them more exhausted than ashamed. Autumn. Autumn confesses both stamen and stem with what ails her. She wears too much makeup, begins tinting her hair red, pulls the old shawl closer on her shoulders, wears small aprons embroidered in yellow and gold, sleeps in on Saturdays and sometimes arrives late for services wearing old ribbons in her hair. Winter. Nebraska becomes one chunk of white glass, chills the life from everything, reflects it back along the Platte and Ogallala. A white lace spinster in gossamer gown walks slowly every inch of the state, carries a single message, recites their names one leaf at a time. I'm not a native Nebraskan. I was born in Washington State, and I came here when I was 18 and was in the Air Force. I joined the Air Force to see the world, and I saw Lincoln and Offutt. The experience was so great for me when I came here. I made so many friends that I came back almost every summer on vacation. This is like the 60s, late 50s. And people would say, "You're going where for your vacation?" I'd say, "I'm going to Omaha, Nebraska." And then I came out in the early 70s. Well, I came out in the mid-60s and lived here for a couple of years, came back, and then I came back in the early 70s, and I've been here ever since. But this is where I grew up. Lincoln is where I grew up. Those are just great, wonderful, wonderful times. I don't live here now. I live in Omaha now. But I think my first impressions were how frightening it was to be here when a tornado was happening, and how strange and wonderful the winters were compared to the winters I was used to. And I liked that sense of there being real distinct seasons. Seattle has one season, and damp. And this has everything, and the water, yeah. So I feel like a Nebraskan. It's really funny, if you look at that first video they did in '86, no, I guess that's not true, it wasn't that video, it was the one they did in the 70s at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. They kept trying to make me say that I was a poet of place, a Nebraska poet. And I kept saying, no, I'm an earth poet, But as I look through my stuff, even the stuff that I don't consider to be a Nebraska poem, it's all spun from stuff here. The images, or if I mention a plant, or, it's all, so it's really ingrained, after a while. I've got a few poems in this that are much closer to home for most of you here. A few poems about Lincoln. The first one is called Mammoth Hall, but it's really Elephant Hall. But I had hoped to publish it in some place like the New Yorker, and I wanted them to be sure they knew what I was talking about. Mammoth Hall. These are the holy ones. I walk among their ancient bones, their august prehistoria, a creature aware of his skin. Something in them calls me to prayer. It is the terrible distance between us, the enormity of their architecture, the great mirror their bones become. These bones and I are all dancing towards the belly of time. We will be gobbled into the dreams of stone, a massive nothinglessness fading like autumn. But just now, I am hide, and they are tusk. I come to be what they can no longer be, to celebrate the way death moves between us, to savor the way these dead refuse to die. I like it too. I'm pleased with the smiles. This is called Visiting the Sheldon Art Museum. And this isn't one visit, this is many visits. sort of compiled into one poem. But I try to get there at least once every 2 years. If I was still a Lincolnite, I'd be there more often. We walk in whispers among the urns and the souls that bloom inside them. The walls burst with images until the sky screams in shapes of wing and stone. Nothing escapes these rooms. Things hang here from Smear to Grandma Moses. I like best the painting of the religious revival where all the people are lifting their hands like paper plates waiting to be filled. Above them, white doves float in transparency. Behind them, Armageddon burns bright as though the sun smashed its jar of red oil. And the last Nebraska or Lincoln poem is about my experience here in 1986 when Joanne Casulo, did I pronounce it correctly, had invited me to come and be involved in this. So who knows, you may be in the next one. This is called Reading in the Heritage Room at the Bennett Martin Library in Lincoln, Nebraska. I fear the lines filled with things they will not see. I want the poems to burn off the page, ignite the lost art of conversation, insist their lessons as surely as the seasons do. Yet I fear the adjectives lumping in their lines. Sometimes punctuation can be terminal. Who knows what darkness waits to be a noun, or how much of it will crumble into literature? I sing my poems the best I can, tell stories on them, interrupt myself with puffs and swallows, worry deep into my watch. Finally, the poems blink out, and we are gone. I don't have to do any puffing. I don't smoke anymore, so a difficult task with all the encouragement from my friend Shirley back there. A little ways away from Lincoln and Nebraska now. Most of you have visited the Mount Rushmore caves, I'm sure. This is from my experience, one of my experiences. I think the most frightening experience I had was discovering that I don't like being in them. I did not anticipate that I would be the kind of person who would become claustrophobic. But the further back we got in those caves, the more it became apparent to me that this was a journey I should not have made. And so while the rest of my clan finished the tour, I ran like a jackrabbit for fresh air and was delighted that I didn't get squished like a fly in there. At any rate, Mount Rushmore Cave. You'll see that I'm much more noble in the poem than I was in the actual experience. I walk this nesting place of ancient silences, this great gut of the Mississippian age, quiet as a stone. Here in the darkness, tons of Earth's voluptuousness oozed its way into forms of dragon and delicate fern-like lace. Whole rooms of prehistoric xylophones hang like giant bats from gullets and jaws of these petrified yawns. I go among the chambers like old water soaking through phosphor limestone. I'm sorry. I go among the chambers like old water soaking through phosphor limestone, seeping between the cracks, seeking like the ancient grandfathers a place in this vastness, some hint of what these stones know but will not tell. Conception Abbey. I'm an observer here. I wear my Christianity like good manners, go bland and exhausted towards the bells, sit along the bench, watch the monks pass like shadows. I've come to scrub the soul of its galloping darkness. I must forget what we were that first summer and learn to fit into what is left of me. Far above, a single dove wings its way from its nest in the printery eaves to the small pond beyond the barn. He cannot know how utterly he assumes the look of my single prayer. The monks do not notice. They are busy contemplating the geometry of lauds. It is their contemplation that moves me to them. I come gnarled and moody, a product of the world's bewildering hardware, in search of the clear and ancient peace. And I think the rest of this stuff sort of happens up in Brunswick. I'm not sure. No, some of it happens at the College of St. Mary. One of them happens in Seattle. We get wasps out at the farm, interesting creatures. And I've had experiences with wasps since I was about 5. At 5, I met a nest of them with my hair. I'm sure that's why it left me in my 40s. At any rate, I always wanted to do a poem about wasps, and so finally I came up with this, and I call it the Algebra of a Solitary Wasp. It is an apple blossom afternoon. A wasp, fragile as anything that blooms, purrs its way among the huge and hungry until its arms are full of golden glue. She's a whir of wings and honey dancing in the wild wind, knows when it means war. She can tell before yellow takes the lawn the time to fill her nest with taunt victims. She can tell before the yellow takes the lawn the time to fill her nest with taunt victims she has stung to a stupor. I have to get that line right. Piled like sticks of bread and tucked away like a secret. She builds gray mansions of homespun paper, jugs of mud, art as seen through insects' eyes. When she's done, she'll lay a single white egg on the warm chest of her choicest victim and seal up the nest for the long night. A thing ravenous will emerge through time, caught between a prehistoric journey and a destination of golden light. A strange white worm begins its odd grazing. By spring, it will have chewed its mystery through. I suppose everyone has to do a hummingbird poem. Have you done a hummingbird poem? No? I like hummingbirds. I put out a thing to feed them up at the farm. I'll be damned if none of them will come near it. I don't know what the problem is. They go to the iris and they go other places, but they don't come where I can catch them and watch them. So this hummingbird exists in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Digging deep into the blossom, his green profile, suspended as if by magic in the strange music of the spheres, shimmers in place, refracted light lush as any flower. He's a thing that feeds on slight nectars, a whir of wings defying gravity, and evidence of Eden moving like a fragrance through the leaves. He's a promise taking solid form, a sacred moment balancing in thin air, a lick of light, the feathery language that talks the iris towards the sun. Very few people know that I had a brother. He didn't live. We were twins. He didn't make it past the first day, past the first hours. In fact, my grandmother and aunt forgot which one it was that lived. So I have no idea if I'm myself or if I am, in fact, my twin who didn't make it. And I've often wondered about him. So this poem is called What My Brother Believed. My brother believed our planet is a cell, that the separating of the continents proves it is dividing at its own rate, and that all creatures on it, past or present, are insignificant to what yet develops here. He believed that the earth is a fertile egg just beginning to divide, that the moon is what is left of the one cosmic sperm that impregnated the earth's atmosphere and spun the whole thing into new motion. He believed he was born to live in the nude, that innocence is never worth the effort, that one always pays a whore more than money. My brother believed no one could grow up in America or the Roman Catholic Church.
Richard Eberhardt says in one of the introductions of my stuff that every poem I write is a religious poem. So water is always the symbol for renewal and new life, so maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. We are, if it wasn't for water, we wouldn't be sitting here talking, would we? The road to evolution is paved on it. It's on this planet, so we're pretty much stuck without it. So maybe it's just like there's fire and there's water and there's air and there's earth, and Everything else is just a mix. I have a great friend at the College of St. Mary, Sister McTill. Did you escape without a class from McTill, or did you take McTill? McTill was the head of our science department for a long time. She's not anymore. She's teaching one course and in charge of a retirement center for nuns now. But I was up to get her one day to go to a committee meeting. We were on the campus ministry committee together, and she had set out for her freshman class drops of water for them to look at through a microscope. And she was still fussing with all of her stuff and her slides, and I kept saying, until we've got to go, we're going to be late, we're always the last ones, we've got to go, you got to get done. Busy yourself and look through those things, you'll find them interesting, or something like that, she said. So I did. Well, it was more than interesting, it was a revelation. I had no idea that there could be such vast differences in different kinds of water when you looked at them through a microscope. There was a raindrop, just a plain, ordinary raindrop. There was a drop of swamp water, and then a drop of water that had been recycled and chlorined. Okay? So those are the 3 drops of water I'm going to take you inside on a trip. Number 1 is the raindrop. I've come to see how magic is the rain, swim among the strange creatures dwelling here. I am sinking in its enormous sea, where unordinary greens of clear grass sprout like paper wings, things that might explain the 5-sided ones made only of hair. I want to find their names in the silvery stuff that blooms on free-floating trees of glass and crystal, renderings of small fish and cranes, swan-like creatures nesting on golden air, colors ripe as purple and sassafras, fragrance carved from the myth, the mystery of rain, dancers who've already begun the steamy dance of evaporation. Inside the swamp water drop. Gargoylish eels and mysterious weeds nest here. This is a droplet dark with brine, a place of lush and overcrowded bulge. I go among these things in fear of my life. A dazzling green darkness dresses in tweed. I wander wet and willing through its small time. Everything here is hungry and thick-skulled, scutters through these black-bellied waters rife with appetite, hell-bent on overfeed. Monstrous worms with translucent heads and spines go between the hounds and the hunters, lulled by a full gut and never-closing eyes. I am lost in a dark drop of dark water. Everything here is sacrifice and slaughter. Into the recycled chlorined drop. Barren as dust, sucking at a cinder. This is the genre of the abandoned. The place is witless and weary as smog. The sweet-soaking fields have turned to ice. Absurd gray landscapes cannot remember what the rain knows, but cannot tell. No one stalks here. The place is Gog and Magog, what is left after Armageddon's vice. I am lost in a drop of dead water, a place where saltlessness and ghosts lie stunned in unscarred waste and ignoble fog. No young or featherless strut or entice a new turning of the most sacred wheel. Things are still wet here, but no longer heal. And you probably didn't notice, but the 3 of those are perfect Shakespearean sonnets. How's that for sneaky? I owe the title of this next piece to Linda Pratt. Linda actually does a lot of work, free work for me. She reads most everything that I write, yells a lot of it into non-existence, and applauds much of it into my basket that says, try to find a place to publish this. And this poem was really sort of written after the poem I just read to you. And at her suggestion that I ought to at least once try to write about water, air, fire, and earth, since every good writer has to deal with those eventually. And she gave it its title as well. It's called The Elements of Being. Water. What I am is mostly water.
a place where salt and seas inch their way through the long darkness. I'm what needs the hidden stuff of rain, its easy and slippery pleasures. I'm a puddle wrapped in skin, a landlocked chunk of sea wash waiting to evaporate in the sun. Air. I'm a place where wind moves like the tides move, a thing where torrents of air croon their way through places of skin and change as surely as the seasons. The wind sings new secrets every day. The heart listens carefully, knows the windswept names it thumps through the genes, depends on this stuff, that nothinglessness, this great invisible breath of the planet. Fire. I'm a place where small fires flint from cell to cell, shimmer in the secrets of the DNA. These nameless lights dare me to feast on the sacred, to dream of flying in the outside of time, to sift through the mystery of mind, the white weeds of memory, the restless sparks that move through the brain and toes. These small fires light the way. Earth. I'm a pile of oddly shaped rocks, the breathlessness of mineral things spun dense as brick. I'm the tailbone and skull of the universe, stones dancing in the mythos of the stars, a thing seeking ways to name its motion. I'm water and mud laced to the likes of marble. I'm watching myself erode in the mirror. I'm a stone thrown in the dark. This is a poem that I've decided, I didn't write it for this purpose, but after I wrote it, I decided, oh, at last, I can do what Billy Stafford and other people do. You do it too, Roy. They write poems that they can use as seasonal greeting cards. So you get the card, and you know you've been remembered, and you also get a chance to read one of their poems. This is called Spring Rain, and it's going to be my Easter card this year. The leafy wind drips this sweet stuff until the roots begin their swooning. I've been hooting at the moon all night. Greetings, woodsy spirit, old ferny friend, thicket thing. I've come to steal your dream, your strange knowings, the songs the rain sings to keep the cedar's leaves dancing. Make room for me, you mossy places. I want to be a wet thing, listening for the sun. Thank you.
Mom, I'm tired. Can we go home now?
2 months ago, the only job this woman could take was one where she could take her son with her. What do you do when there's no one to watch him but you? She's getting help at a daycare center. They got help from the United Way. All because the United Way got help from you. The United Way. It brings out the best in all of us.